In February 1998, the cold weather enveloped the city. At that time, I was studying philosophy as a major. The subject was fascinating and challenging for a young man who was an avid thinker. I used to spend a lot of time debating with Christians about their faith. My Christian friends and I shared insights with each other. At the time, I was renting an apartment with a classmate. One night, we got into a heated argument. We often had conflicts over various issues due to our different living habits. These accumulated grievances finally exploded that night. I decided to leave the place temporarily. Another classmate of mine lived in a nearby apartment, and I decided to look for him. When I arrived at his apartment, I found him with his friends. They were listening to music, talking and drinking. I joined their party. The setting allowed me to relax and relieve stress for a while. As the alcohol seeped in, my thoughts gradually became clouded and my judgment began to suffer. I didn't realize I had had many drinks. After a while, I wanted to go downstairs to use the bathroom. As I tried to walk down the stairs, my legs became weak. I tried my best to keep my balance, but the effects of alcohol made me lose control and I fell down at once. The moment I fell, I felt like the whole world was spinning. My body hit each flight of stairs and severe pain spread throughout my body. Finally, I hit my head on the wall. When I regained consciousness, I had appeared in the hospital. I remember that many people were gathered around my bed. I could see the worry on their faces. After the doctor saw my injuries, the doctor decided to perform further tests and scans on my head. The paramedics wheeled me into a room. I felt physical discomfort and tension. The scanner made a low sound and rotated around my head. After a while, I felt like I was entering a completely different realm. A strange sensation permeated around my body, as if I was floating upward. I left my body. The medical staff was still busy at work. I no longer felt pain or discomfort. Instead, I felt a sense of peace. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying on a bed. There was nothing else in the room but the bed. The room was very bright, but I could not see the light source. Just then, I saw a door. It looked different from the surrounding rooms and gave off a special glow. Curiosity drove me toward the door, and I reached out my hand and gently pushed the door open. Suddenly, I felt an inexplicable suction, as if there was an invisible force pulling me outward. For a moment, I lost my balance. I finally landed on a piece of grass. The grass looked extraordinarily vibrant under the sunlight. The wind around me blew gently, giving me a touch of freshness. This place felt very strange to me. There were no buildings or streets. Only endless grass and blue sky. I began to explore the grass. My feet felt like I was one with nature as I stepped on the soft grass. After I walked over a small hill, a group of people appeared in front of me. They were gathered together, wearing black clothing. My footsteps paused for a moment, and I felt an unusual sense of tension and fear. As I approached them, I saw my father and mother. Their eyes were red and swollen, and my mother was crying uncontrollably. To my dismay, I realized that the scene before me was my funeral. The coffin was covered with white flowers. There was also a headstone with my name and birthday in the cemetery, which made me feel incredible. This discovery threw me into confusion and despair. I didn't know what had happened. My emotions became very confused. I approached my father and mother and tried to communicate with them. However, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I called out and touched, they seemed unable to perceive my presence. They continued to cry. To them, I had left this world. I wanted to tell them that I was alive, I wanted to hug them and comfort them. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break this invisible barrier. The people around me gradually dispersed and left the cemetery, leaving only me and the silence. I stared at my tombstone, the handwriting clearly engraved on it, which was my former name and birthday. The scene touched my heart deeply. I tried to touch my own body, but my hand went right through it. It was as if I had become an invisible being. Suddenly, a powerful force pulled me back to the hospital. I saw myself lying on a bed, wrapped in white bedding. My face was very pale. Doctors and nurses were busily moving through the corridors. After a while, the doctors left the room one by one. I heard one of the doctors whisper to another doctor that we had lost him. The words plunged me into endless sadness and despair. Only one doctor remained by my bedside, and he stood there silently, his eyes revealing a deep frustration. I could feel the struggle and confusion inside him. I tried to get close to him and tell him that I was fine now. However, I was beyond the boundaries of reality and I could not interact with him in any way. Finally, this doctor also left the room. It was at this point that my soul once again moved upward uncontrollably. When I passed through the hospital ceiling, I came to a mysterious place. A bright light pervaded the surroundings, and everything was filled with peace and tranquility. This place seemed to be a boundless universe, filled with endless energy. A powerful energy was injected into my soul. My existence transcended the bonds of matter and was no longer limited by time and space. I felt light and free. I looked at my arms curiously, and I noticed that they had not lost their original form, but the substance that made them up was different. They were made up of a pure and bright white air mass that emitted a warm and serene glow. This substance seemed to be a pure energy. I felt that I was no longer an independent individual, but interconnected with the entire universe. The boundary between me and the universe became blurred, and I could feel other souls. Suddenly, a light more dazzling than mine came close to me. This light was as bright as the sun. And I could not see the scene around me. A gentle but firm male voice came into my ears, his voice was full of authority and wisdom. The man told me that I couldn't go on because someone had made a mistake that had caused me to be sent to this place by mistake. He explained that I had to return to Earth and complete my mission there before I could continue my journey. The man's voice was full of care and guidance, and his words contained endless wisdom. He explained to me the purpose and responsibility of my existence and reminded me of the mission that still needed to be accomplished on Earth. After this man's voice faded, I felt a force that was pulling me back to Earth, back to the reality I knew so well. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in a dark and cold room. The surrounding area was filled with an eerie aura, and the dim lights cast eerie shadows. This sight was in stark contrast to the bright world I had experienced before, which made me feel very depressed. The air around me was filled with a strange putrid smell. I noticed some cold metal instruments and old medical equipment in the room. I was more than sure I was in a morgue. I tried to stand up, but I could barely move. My heart was racing and sweat was dripping from my forehead. I realized that I had to get out of this horrible place as soon as possible. In the corner of the morgue, I noticed a broken trash can on the floor. With all my strength, I banged the trash can on the table. I hoped that someone outside would hear it. I hoped that my actions would attract the attention of the hospital staff and help me escape this horrible situation. Suddenly, there were footsteps outside the door and I knew my efforts had not been in vain. A paramedic entered the morgue with a look of panic and confusion on his face. When I woke up again, it was 4 days later. I felt shocked and confused. I didn't know what had happened in that time, why I had lost consciousness, and how I had reawakened. I found myself in a comfortable hospital bed, surrounded by clean white sheets and soft pillows. The room was bright and tidy, in contrast to the previous morgue. The sunlight illuminated the entire room, making me feel very warm. I lay quietly on the bed and thought back to my previous experience. As I was deep in thought, a doctor came into the room. The doctor explained to me that I had suffered a serious head injury. I was taken to the hospital for emergency treatment. I was in a coma during which my heart had stopped beating. He told me that I was a medical miracle. He said I was an incredible survivor. It was at this time that my mother walked into the room. Her eyes were filled with worry, and the moment she saw me wake up, her face burst into a happy smile. She went to the bedside and gently held my hand, her eyes filled with tears. She said in a trembling voice, "Son, you're finally awake. I have been praying for you." She gently stroked my hair, as if to remove all the uneasiness I felt inside. When I got home, I sat next to my mother and told her everything I had experienced in the hospital. My mother listened quietly to every word I said, her face filled with amazement. She grabbed my hand tightly and her eyes revealed a deep awe. My mother said, "Son, what an incredible thing you have gone through. I cannot imagine how lost and alone my world would be if I lost you. I believe that God saw how strong and brave you were, and He was not willing to let you go. He sent you back to me at a critical time, a true miracle." She hugged me tightly and tears flowed down her face. My mother thanked God with all her heart. She was convinced that only God could save me at the moment my heart stopped beating. I listened quietly to my mother's words and felt the faith and determination deep in her heart. Although I did not have the same strong faith as my mother, I understood the love and care she expressed. I am grateful that God sent me back to my mother so that we could continue to live together. Since then, I have passed on my faith and love to those around me. I believe God's guidance will lead me through every stage of my life. This experience has made us more aware of the fragility and preciousness of life and inspired me to cherish and treat each other more kindly. Since I was a child, I have been a firm believer in the existence of God. I rarely talk about this experience to others. This experience of mine was the best gift God ever gave me. I felt like I left my body and entered a realm beyond reality. It was not simply a dream or a hallucination, because I was clearly aware of my existence. When this experience occurred, I felt a special connection with God. I was able to perceive the presence and infinite love of God. 20 years after the near-death experience, I also saw scenes from Judgment Day. I have suffered from asthma since I was very young. When I was 11 years old, my mother left this world because of cancer. The news was a huge shock to me and I felt very sad. Shortly after my mother's death, I felt very helpless and lost. However, during that difficult time, something incredible happened. One night, I was lying in bed. Suddenly, I felt a strange phenomenon, and my body gradually fell into a state of complete paralysis. This experience was very scary and frightening for me. I struggled and tried to move my body. No matter how hard I tried to move, my body felt like it was completely out of control. At the same time, I found myself unable to make any sound. In the process, my breathing began to become difficult and the symptoms of an asthma attack began to appear. It felt like there was an invisible pressure pressing against my chest cavity. I felt like I was in a state where I had no control over my body and my breathing was restricted. My soul was leaving my body. All my pain was gone. A spinning tunnel appeared in front of my eyes. This tunnel seemed very long. When I entered the tunnel, I noticed that there were many tiny balls of light around me. I was curious about these balls of light, which looked like the souls of other people. These spheres of light emitted a soft glow, and they passed quickly around me, as if each one knew exactly where it was going. It was as if there was some special connection between me and these balls of light. This made me no longer feel alone. As I turned my attention forward, a dazzling light flashed in front of my eyes. This light emitted a warm energy. I could vaguely see a huge square building. Many souls passed quickly by me, all moving toward that square building. I understood that that was our destination. I felt a gravitational force that drew me deeply forward. As I entered into the light, a beautiful scene unfolded before me. A meadow full of flowers. Each flower bloomed with brilliant colors and gave off an enchanting fragrance. The building emitted a great light. There was not a single shadow as far as I could see, everything was so bright. It was as if the light could penetrate everything. I was immersed in this beautiful sight, admiring every detail. I knew that I had come to a pure world, the home of our souls. Here, there is no pain or worry, only endless love and peace. I felt my soul was liberated and reborn, merging with this wonderful existence. Curiously, I walked toward the square building. It seemed to be suspended in mid-air and exuded an aura of mystery. As I got closer to it, I was amazed to find that it was studded with many huge gems at its base. These gems were of various colors. Each gemstone was so huge that they shone brightly. The gems were all perfectly blended with each other. It was a spectacular sight I had never seen before. When I looked up, I noticed a high wall above the gems, which seemed to be made of a golden material. This wall gave me a strong sense of security, as if no evil force could penetrate this place. Here, the purest love pervaded everywhere. I found 3 doors in the wall, and they were far apart. I walked up to one of the doors. It felt like the door was made of pearls. It glowed softly, as if it were polished marble, and its beauty could not be described in words. Nothing on earth could compare to it. I looked down at the floor in front of the door, which looked like it was made of glass. This glass was so thick that I could not see through to its interior. I knew that this was my home. In this moment, I felt a strong sense of belonging. I knew that once I stepped through the door, I would return to my true home and be with those I loved. Standing in front of the gate, I knew that Jesus was on the other side of that door. Even though I could not see him or hear his voice, I could clearly feel his presence. This feeling filled my whole heart. My emotions became so mixed that I couldn't help but cry. Because I wasn't ready, I didn't want to leave my father and sister for a while. This thought made me feel sad and heartbroken. I understood that once I stepped through that door, I would not be able to return to my father. Suddenly, a dazzling angel appeared in front of me. Her presence gave me an overwhelming sense of peace. Her beauty could not be described in words. That angel gently told me that I could not stay here yet. She told me that now was not the time for me to leave, that I still had a mission to complete. With the angel's departure, I re-entered my body. At this moment, I was able to breathe normally again and my asthma symptoms were gone. This was another opportunity given to me by Jesus to continue my journey. There was a time when I would often have dreams about the end times. Most of them were very scary. I didn't understand at the time why they were being shown to me. When I was 31 years old, an unusual experience changed everything. I was lying in bed at the time. Suddenly, I felt a warm hand reach through my rib cage and into my chest. The touch was full of supernatural power. I could clearly feel the hand wrapping around my heart, as if giving it strength and warmth. In that moment, my heart began to slowly stop beating. Time seemed to freeze, and the sensations in my body gradually disappeared, while my consciousness became clearer and sharper. I knew that I was being taken out of my body and my soul was beginning to enter a whole new realm. The process was so swift and peaceful. I felt myself becoming lighter and no longer limited by the confines of my body. Everything around me became bright and clear. The next thing I knew, I found myself in my old home, which was a relatively remote rural area. I saw a sidewalk on a hill, a road I had never seen before. I also saw my father. He was dressed in plain clothes and walking slowly down the sidewalk. I hadn't seen him in a long time. After walking a short distance, he suddenly stopped, found a chair and sat down. Just then, there was a sudden loud boom. I turned to look at the sky and noticed that it was beginning to grow dim. Lightning cut through the darkness of the sky and illuminated the surroundings. The sound of thunder made me panic. The sky seemed to roar. Suddenly, a huge crack opened in the sky, like an unfolded scroll. The crack spread rapidly, expanding in every direction. At that opening, an intense bright light shone on the earth. As I stared at the light, I could see the figure of a man and knew exactly who it was. My attention turned back to my father, and I shouted to him, "Jesus is coming. Today is the day of judgment." However, no matter how hard I shouted, my voice seemed to be blown away by the wind and did not reach my father's ears. I watched my father sitting in a chair by the roadside, seemingly lost in his own thoughts, oblivious to all that was happening around him. My mood became restless, hoping to make him aware of the coming of Jesus and the approach of the day of judgment. In the midst of the chaotic scene, I saw many people running and hiding in fear, clutching various valuables in their hands. My eyes turned to the sky again, and I saw the souls of the dead, floating upward, drawn by some invisible force. Then, I was drawn by some invisible hand to ascend to the sky. In an instant, I was in the presence of Jesus. He was dressed in a dazzling white robe. His hair was dark brown. His presence was full of purity and power. As I gazed at Jesus, I noticed a distinct hole in the palm of his hand. The hole, as if it were an eternal mark. I also noticed Jesus' feet, one of which was partially exposed, while the other was hidden behind the robe. I knew that the hidden foot bore the same signs of trauma. To the left of Jesus stood a woman. I knew it was the Virgin Mary. She was dressed in a beautiful blue robe, with her long hair covered by a shawl. Around him, I saw others being brought in as well. Jesus could see into the heart of every person and examine their actions and thoughts. The scales of righteousness swung, weighing the goodness and sinfulness of each person. Some were brought to Jesus with faces full of repentance and humility. They confessed their faults and sought God's forgiveness and mercy. Their sins were forgiven, and they were led to the path of light. However, there were also those who were terrified. Remorse and regret filled their hearts. Their sins were revealed. They were condemned and faced eternal torment and separation. Here I also saw my deceased mother. She looked so beautiful and younger than she looked at the time of her death. I stood beside her and we gathered to sing. Suddenly, I felt a strong force push me away from my mother. I was pulled back into my body. The scene in front of me became instantly blurred and I realized I was returning to the real world. I opened my eyes and found myself lying in bed. My heartbeat gradually returned to normal. This Judgment Day scene seemed to be just a dream, but it brought me revelation and insight. I lay quietly in bed and recalled the good times I had with my mother. Even though I could no longer be with her in the real world, I knew that on another level, our connection still existed. This experience has given me a deeper understanding of life and death. It reminded me to cherish the family around me. It also inspired me to pursue goodness and justice, and that we will be judged by God. Judgment Day is real. Now, I am more determined to walk the path of life. Whether I face challenges or enjoy joys, I will always remember the scenes of Judgment Day as guidance and motivation. I will pursue the true meaning of life in a more meaningful way and strive to become a good person. I stood up and walked to the window. The sunlight sprinkled on my face. Warm and bright, as if it was God's favor and blessing.